Mr Gove, thank you very much for spending a bit of time with us this morning. I do want to talk to you about the shops announcement a little bit later on, but we've had many questions about what many people would have watched yesterday, both the Dominic Cummings press conference and then the Prime Minister's briefing as well. We heard Dominic Cummings, didn't we? He spoke about mistakes. He even mentioned regret. Do you know why he couldn't use the word sorry, why he didn't apologise?
Well, I think Dominic completely understands the sense of concern that people had felt as the story broke. I think the account that he gave yesterday was exhaustive. It was detailed. It was verifiable. And I think that people will make their own mind up as they listened to Dominic's account or as they read about it subsequently. And I think most people will understand that he was someone who was under pressure, who sought to put the health of his wife and his son first, and who took care to ensure that they, as a unit, as a family unit, were not in danger of infecting other people.
And I think, Mr Gove, the thing is that lots of people have been under pressure for many weeks because they've been following the government guidance of staying at home for, as it was for many weeks, until it moved to staying alert. And they too will have had ill children. They too will have had parents who are struggling. Some will not have been able to attend funerals. And they've all been in this situation, and yet their response was to follow the guidance, which they felt was quite clear. And that is guidance that Dominic Cummings felt he didn't need to follow. That, I think, is the issue for lots of people watching this morning.
I quite understand. I'd say two things. The first thing is that the guidance does make it clear that there are specific circumstances, not least for the care of a vulnerable child, where some flexibility is allowed to any family. The second thing is that as Dominic himself made clear in his statement, he wasn't able to go to the funeral of his own uncle. And of course, many of us have faced restrictions during this period of lockdown. And because of those restrictions, I can entirely understand why people are concerned if someone was deliberately flouting them in a way that was heedless, reckless or careless. Dominic gave an account of his actions and the steps that he took in order to make sure not just that his family was safe, but also that there was no risk of infecting other people. The purpose of the guidance, and I'm so grateful to so many people for adhering to it, is to ensure that we can maintain the downward pressure on the infection, and that is what so many have sought to do.
Okay.
And in the case of Dominic, what he sought to do was to ensure that he and his family were not in a position where they risk spreading the infection to others.
You thank many people in the UK for following those government guidelines. If everyone had interpreted the rules in the same way that Mr Cummings did, what effect would that have had in the UK?
Well, not everyone is in exactly the same position. The important thing to recognise is that for all of us, what we must do, what we needed to do, was to reduce the risk of infecting others. As I say, Dominic gave a full account of his actions, and in that it was clear that he was seeking to avoid infecting others while also seeking to ensure that
Can I interrupt you there, Mr Gove? On that point specifically, I mean, just to clear up some specifics, it would appear that either he suspected that his wife had coronavirus on the 27th of March, and yet, even though it seemed a little bit unclear about that, he returned to work at that point before then travelling to Durham. So that in itself is not following the government guidelines, because if there's any suspicion, it was to self-isolate, wasn't it?
Well, let me be clear about that. As Dominic himself pointed out, his wife was ill, but she was not displaying symptoms of coronavirus at that time. So, again, the guidance is clear. If you have a family member who has symptoms, a high temperature, a persistent dry cough, then you should self-isolate. But Dominic's wife did not have those symptoms at that time.
OK, and if this is, as you're trying to explain, that this was fine and he was in exceptional circumstances, then why, this happened on the 27th of March, that Mr Cummings and his wife travelled to Durham. On the 30th of March, Downing Street was asked to confirm where he was, and they said he was isolating at home. Why was there that information given out if there is nothing to hide?
Well, again, one of the questions that was in the minds of Dominic and his family were the security concerns that he mentioned yesterday. As a result of some misreporting earlier in this year, there were a number of unfortunate and unattractive security threats to Dominic, and so therefore it was the case that he made the decision that he did on the basis of safeguarding his family, and of course it was also the case that the information that was given out was there in order to ensure appropriate safeguarding was in place.
Did you know he was in Durham?
No.
At what point were you made aware of that?
When I saw the newspapers break the story on Friday evening.
And what did you think when you saw that? Because it would appear that the Prime Minister was aware of this before that story was then made available in the newspapers.
When I read the story, I was convinced that there would be an explanation from Dominic, because I know that he's a man of honour and integrity. As people will have had the chance to hear yesterday, they will know from his own account that he was acting in a way which sought to safeguard his family, sought to limit, indeed reduce the risk of infection to anyone else, and which took account of a range of circumstances. People will make their own mind up, and as Dominic himself said, there'll be many people who will think that his actions were wrong or mistaken, but looking at it in the round, I think that his actions were reasonable.
One area in particular which I think has drawn quite a bit of interest from people is this issue of driving 30 miles to Barnard Castle to check his eyesight. Just to be clear on that, the chairman of the Police Federation of England and Wales said that anyone concerned about their vision should not drive in order to test their ability to do so. On that point in particular, can you explain a way around that? Why you would take on that journey to test your eyesight out in that situation?
First thing to say is that Dominic had received medical advice, senior medical advice, saying that he was safe to return to work at that point. It was more than 14 days after he had first shown symptoms of the virus. It was important, he believed, that he return to work, and certainly it's the case that his dedication to work is phenomenal. He wanted to make sure before taking the journey down the A1 that he was safe to drive, and of course in the course of that journey it was confirmed, he confirmed to himself, that he was safe to drive.
If you, Mr. Gove, if your eyesight is not good enough, that in itself is an offence under the Road Traffic Act.
Dominic's eyesight was good enough. That was the whole point of the journey, to determine that he could drive safely.
So you are entirely happy with that explanation, which also happened to be on his his wife's birthday, which another reason why people have brought that into consideration when they are listening to his explanation of what they heard yesterday.
Yes, but to my mind, I can't see the relevance of that. He drove to Barnard Castle. The family stopped. He walked a few yards, sat on a bench for a short period of time, then walked back to the car, and then drove back to his home. So I think the fact that it was, as it also happens, Easter Sunday is immaterial.
See, the issue is, I think, Mr. Gove, is that many people will be listening to Dominic Cummings yesterday, listening to the Prime Minister and listening to you now today. And they have had these conversations with themselves, with their family members. They have been desperate to visit their parents. They have been desperate to visit their family members. They have had ill children. They have been suffering with coronavirus, and yet they abided by the government guidelines. And I think many people are listening to you today and saying that even if Dominic Cummings didn't actually break those guidelines, what he did was against the spirit of the guidelines. And here is a man who was part responsible for bringing these regulations in, which have governed all of us. And many people will be watching this morning thinking, I followed that to the letter because I was trying to protect not only myself, but my family and others, and Dominic Cummings didn't.
That is the case that has been put consistently over the course of the last 3 days. But as you yourself, I think, acknowledged, he didn't break the letter of those guidelines. He was acting in a way that many people...
I said the spirit of the guidelines, Mr. Gove.
Well, that's the point. I think people will make their own mind up on the basis of what they heard yesterday. But it wasn't, you quite understandably make some points. You say, people haven't seen their parents. I haven't seen my parents, and I appreciate the pain and difficulty that was caused. But it wasn't the case that Dominic went to to see his parents in the way that was reported or speculated on over the weekend. There were a number of things that were said over the course of the weekend, and I'm not critical of anyone. This is a fast-moving media environment, but they were inaccurate, and I can understand on that basis why some people, on the basis of some of those inaccurate stories, were particularly angry. Now that those inaccuracies have been put to rest, now that it's clear that Dominic didn't break the guidelines, people can then form their own judgment about whether or not what they thought he did was wise. My own view is that it's entirely reasonable. The allegation from some was that he was heedlessly and recklessly putting other people at risk and in danger. I think if we look at the whole story, we can see that that is not the case, and that he was seeking to act in a way which, as I say, sought not to risk any spread of the infection, but also to make sure that his family were safe and protected.
Quickly, again, to go back to my first question, why, given what you've said there, why couldn't he just have said sorry? I think that would have appeased a lot of people.
Well, I think that anyone who saw Dominic's account yesterday would have recognised that this has been a situation with which he's wrestled, and that there are no easy options for anyone when it comes to balancing so many requirements. But on the whole, as a man of integrity, he thinks that he did do the right thing. He also recognises, as a fair-minded man, that there are many other people who may take a different view, and I understand that.
I want to ask you about shops. One more question on this before I move on. Given that, as you said, he is a man of integrity, if there is a police investigation and they decide that he has broken those regulations, will he have to stand down?
I'm not going to speculate on that because I don't believe that he has. We had earlier in the week stories about what the police may or may not have done, which were subsequently clarified. So I just don't think that speculating about the police in this way is fair to them, fair to him, or fair to anyone else.
The Prime Minister announced yesterday that all retail shops can reopen on the 15th of June. Can you ensure this morning to our viewers that there will be safety built into that and measures built into that to make sure that there is protection once people do return to shops, and for businesses as well?
Yes.
What sort of measures would you like to talk about this morning?
Thank you. It's appropriate when shops reopen on the 15th that we have social distancing. We know already from the way in which supermarkets and food stores have opened that it is possible to sell goods, possible for people to get the goods that they need, and to do so while respecting social distancing. Obviously, as more stores open, it's important that we also have high-quality hygiene, and that we ensure that everything from the provision of hand sanitizer to overnight hygiene in the stores is of the highest level. It's also the case that we need to ensure that some of the shopping habits that people might have grown used to in the pre-COVID days are habits that we all exercise a degree of restraint on. So when it comes to touching and testing goods, when it comes to trying on clothing, when it comes to trying makeup and so on, that all of us exercise restraint in not doing that, recognising that as these stores reopen, it is a new normal, but it will allow us to ensure that there are a wider range of goods. It will also ensure that the economy can return to a new normal. That's absolutely vital for people's jobs. It's particularly vital because some of the, those in our society who are poorer work in retail, and we need to make sure that we provide them with economic security, and we also need to make sure that our economy is restored to greater health, because a healthy economy is necessary in order to ensure that our NHS gets the resources it needs in order to keep people well.
Just a brief comment from Christine, who says, I'm not interested in going to shops. I want to see my mum and my grandchildren again. When might Christine and many others hear something about that?
Well, we're going to see more in the course of the next few weeks about how we can ensure that more people can see each other. It is the case that you can, and again, I don't know Christine's circumstances, it is the case that you can see a relative or a friend outside in appropriate socially distanced circumstances, but we are looking at how we can ensure that more people can see each other outside in a safe way.
Appreciate your time this morning, Mr. Gove. Thank you very much. That's Michael Gove joining us live on Breakfast.